Yeah.
And then go ahead and start. Recording.
All right, we're good to go.
I'm good.
So we're going to call to order our committee of the whole for March 14th at 5 p.m. And first things good with the order, and council members have anything to do with the order? No, all right. We can actually skip the next one, right? We don't need to review the regular meeting agenda. And then, so we'll just go ahead and move on to our first item, which is ARC presentation and discussion with our city engineer, Larissa Grandel, and Director Lenashevsky.
Well, good evening, everyone. Steve Lenashevsky, Public Works. We have ARC and representative from Beckwith. So Mr. Tom is online, Larissa's online, and Mr. Daniel is in person with us. I think the intent is to kind of pick up where we left off. I don't know if we had any remarks from last time we needed to share, but still move forward. And I think the screen's pulled up.
Yeah, we'll push it. We're gonna put it to the right. Just give it a second.
No, basically.
Where's the, does anybody know where the full screen, which one the full screen is? We don't.
Should be that box.
The second one with the arrows to the right.
Oh, the arrows pointing in either corner.
Yeah. Or to the middle bottom.
There, over the back.
Yeah, there you go.
There it is, to your right. Great. One more. That one.
There you go.
Here.
Cool.
Thanks,
I
guys.
was gonna point. If you could come back, we'll just hit the agenda briefly, come back on the slide. Oh, sorry, go back to the top, sorry.
And then Tom, you can hear us and we can hear you, right?
Tom Beckwith, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Barely.
Should we turn that volume up at all or no? I have it up.
Can you hear me better now?
We're coming out here.
It's not.
Oh, it's switched. Switch to your computer, not the owl.
You're not. This screen.
Technology switches. Settings, preferences, from what I can tell, never likes. I can't find any. Maybe, yeah. Yeah, so.
We're switching it to the hour again.
Okay.
Can we test again?
That's Tom. Can you say something again, Tom?
Are you talking to me?
There you go. Yes,
Perfect.
They're the only Tom in town.
thank you.
Okay,
You're coming through the owl.
all right.
Okay.
So thanks, everybody, again, for having us back and continuing. This was the continuation of the last time, another workshop. We'll pick up where we last left off. Hopefully you all had a chance to look a little closer at the asset outcomes. But that's where we'll pick up again. We started with City Hall. And ideally, we'd love to get to the decision tree. That might be, again, a little too much for everybody, but the idea there is to just talk about and have a conversation with you all about how we want to look at the assets in its next phase. And Tom will help clarify some of that a bit, hopefully through the financing strategies. I know we promised to talk to you about that last time. And Tom has quite an extensive experience and a slideshow to put together, talking about how you can finance potential projects. And I think you all received, Steve, correct me if I'm wrong, but you might have received a brief on some of those notes.
Yeah, I sent an email about an hour ago.
Yeah, so on the fly. Next slide, please. Thank you.
We're gonna get there.
Sometimes it's easy to just click page down.
I know, it didn't work.
Oh, lovely.
Mhm.
So, yes, last time, I think some of you, most of you saw this. But again, the intent of these were to show you numbers that are relative to the assets. And that was again, a exercise that we went through to talk about either to retain and renovate and or build new. And each of the assets that we've been talking about, we have pulled together these numbers to show, and it's all based on, again, on the left, retain and renovate existing land value, existing building value, and renovation requirements. And I think last time I also explained that that number is the number that tracks to our matrix for the cost for building per square foot cost in renovation.
Dan, I don't
Yes.
see the PowerPoint. Mine
Oh.
is stuck on the clerk screen.
Okay.
Push stop share really quick and you do it. Thank you, Tom, for letting us know that.
Thank you, Tom,
There we are.
because if you can't see, others can't, right? I presume.
You can see it now.
I can see people. I cannot see.
No,
So
not yet.
let's- Okay. We have to reshare, so I can see the share. Share screen.
We just did this at office too. Something just changed today.
Where's your mouse at? It's right there. Now
There.
these,
How about that?
I can see the PowerPoint. Thank you.
Okay.
I know, I'm a fan of times.
Better now?
Yes.
Thanks.
Where was I? So, yes, again, the idea to retain and renovate, is the number for renovation requirements for the assets. We also added the line, to clarify from Rick's comments and others last time too, that to construct these, there's no, most of the properties don't have the space to expand upon. So it's not apples for apples, if you think about the programming exercise when it comes to the new build. The new build is the inclusion of the programming exercises that we went through. So that is, we want to make that perfectly clear here. So what you see here on the left again is retain and renovate. And then the total investment to retain, we have listed also what we believe is the potential useful life, which is again back from the matrices that we've talked about and all of the asset evaluations. And then pros and cons. We begin to list the pros and cons here for everybody to see and of course add to as we get through that. And then again, the clarity at the very bottom is that we say that this building, for instance, can't be expanded on the current property. And so that was clarity that we wanted to add for everybody. City Hall, again, if you look at these numbers, the comparison here is about 2.6 million. The new build, again, just as City Hall, we've listed probable land value. These numbers were taken from a variety of means, meaning we had some of the city's historical previous property, not assessments, but the property values from 2017. We've escalated them to today's dollars. And then, of course, the new construction cost is what we've evaluated from our current consultants on construction value and the things that we would, all the items that you need to build a brand new building. And then by this formula, we also show you the less the sale of existing City Hall. That is, if you were to sell the City Hall and the land, you would, again, take that profit back for a total investment value here of about 9.4. And then if it's a new build, Most everything that we're doing now is anywhere from 50 to 75 years. There's lots of factors that drive that. Sustainable buildings are 75 and up these days from a new build. And then again, here, pros and cons. We started to list some last time for City Hall, and I know, again, that's some of the conversation that we wanted to still have with you all, but a new City Hall would pick up a lot of things, of course, that we cannot do in the existing City Hall. And some of the newer stuff that we've talked about, for instance, of course, is the larger space and more needs that we have for the growth of staff, flexible space, and again, some of those suggested again by the mayor for a warming center, an overnight shelter, and of course, an emergency operations center, which we know this facility isn't up to those standards currently. Again, cons, again, we're trying to list things here separately, but we have chosen, again, a few options for the site and rebuild, but the availability of land is the question still, and where a new City Hall or any other building might go. Questions here on City Hall? Well, yes, sir.
Under renovation requirements, is that including an addition, even though an addition isn't feasible?
No, this number here?
Yeah,
Yeah, no, that is just taking the building as is right now and renovating it, get it up to code. And all the things we had, it's not the expansion of the building at all.
so is that, because I was looking at another sheet and it's like, if you had to replace every component of the building,
Yeah.
that's how much it would cost. But typically, I mean, like if you looked at a vehicle you owned, if you had to replace every component of your vehicle, it would be worth, it would be so expensive,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
No one would ever do that. And so I'm just trying to understand, like, what renovation, I'm not, this building is a poor example, potentially.
Yeah,
But do you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
when you look at this, try to understand, like reasonably, how much would you have to invest to have the building appropriately? usable?
yes,
Does that make sense?
you're wanting to quantify
Yeah,
the amount on the building, and that would be a more detailed down, tuned down number, yes, relative to the quantity of the items in the existing building.
yeah, because you wouldn't piece by piece replace every component.
Correct.
Because that creates a $2 million renovation cost.
Right.
But
No,
that
that,
just,
we had to start somewhere with. a
right, I
number.
get it. Mhm,
And that number is based on what the replacement value of certain components
mhm.
by cost per square foot. And then you total all those up. That's how that comes out.
Yeah, I guess I'm trying to find a number that would be useful in the analysis, and I guess I'm thinking if I looked at my own personal home and figured out using the way this was done, I mean, my house would be worth $3 million probably, and then I would say, oh, it'd be cheaper to just buy $1 million house.
Yeah.
But that wouldn't be, you know what I mean? Like, so I'm just trying to figure out, this is a poor example, but maybe the public works building that we've invested money in, it potentially is usable. Yet this calculation would create possibly a very huge number, even though the building is usable. And the same for the police building. I mean, it's not perfectly ideal, but unfortunately, sometimes
Yeah,
reality means you don't get perfect ideal, I guess, is where I'm coming from. So I'm trying to understand, like on the police one especially, I think the dollar amount was, maybe you could go back a slide on the police one, the renovation requirements.
it's a next
Yeah,
one.
oh, for some reason I thought I'd
Next one.
seen it for a second.
Yeah.
Oh, it was there for a second. So that one's like $3 million. I mean, would we really have to spend $3 million right now to make the building usable?
No,
Okay,
no, that's what I'm trying to at least make somewhat apples to oranges, because there's no program built here, right? But that number is based on our walkthrough assessments by all the consultants and looking at that property and the building component times the price per square foot to fix the things of that building. You don't have to do them all at the same time. And again, that relates back to like what Rick's looking here relative to priority, right? There's a priority list of what we believe needs to be done with those buildings. And we're not getting into that here with these numbers. This is just the overall number.
Okay,
We can go back and fine tune the priorities to show and to have the city use like over term, long
I got
term,
it. Mhm.
how to construct or how to, if you want to stretch that out and do those renovations over time. This exercise is simply just trying to give you the big numbers
Uh-huh.
to compare between new and retained.
Councilmember Lovett, I saw it really quick. Will you let me know if you see hands on that?
Yeah,
Okay.
I'm not logged in.
Go ahead, Councilmember Lovett.
I'm trying to get to this question in like a reasonably quick way, but. There's a new, hypothetically, we buy some land and we hypothetically build a new space.
Yeah.
That takes 5 years, 2 years, 3 years. In the time that it takes to build that new space, our old space is depreciating and falling apart.
Yeah.
What's not captured in this screenshot is the cost of maintaining
Yeah.
the building that's already behind the 8 ball,
Yeah.
so to speak. And the time it's gonna take to also build up the other building. So like, there's actually a delta in there, a cost delta that we're not seeing, that you have to add to the overall number. Those are just big numbers, and that's a big number to not identify. I'm not asking you to identify it now, but I just want to put that out there, because that's like a gap I'm seeing. And it doesn't seem to be a time frame on this. I can't see them, I forgot my
Yeah,
glasses.
no, we didn't. No,
Yeah, so, and what, I'd be curious if they even have like a rough shot of how long it takes, like how long did it take to build one of these in Snoqualmie or North Bend?
Yeah, I mean, that process could be 3 years at most.
Right.
If you count design, bid, build, that type of thing. I haven't went as far as 5, if you started today,
Sure.
right? It hasn't went that long, but
I'm just thinking from finding the property to
Yeah.
open the doors.
that's, again, that number can still come. We can still have that number that time, because you're right. These don't talk about that depreciation here in this chart, so.
We'll go Councilmember Mercer and then Schaefer.
Yeah, I think sort of I'm coming back to a topic that Councilmember Naflin and had also raised, just to get a little more clarity. I think when we talk about the renovation requirements, I think you've indicated that does not include expansion, so that's existing square footage in building. But in terms of trying to think about that, even if it's brought up to code and beyond, essentially, I'm trying to sort of, from an apples to apples perspective in terms of quality, there's still going to be deficiencies in terms of new construction versus old construction, simply just, I'm assuming because of building standards, insulation codes, other things. But I think that the key piece I'm looking for clarity or confirmation on is when we talk about the renovation requirements, that essentially is everything you would need to put into building, not necessarily at one time, to maintain the existing square footage and meet that remaining useful life that you have quoted here. Is that kind of the right way to think about it? In terms, and versus the new construction, which would be built to current code, higher,
Standard.
efficiency construction. And so it would have both an investment cost, a longer useful life, but also potentially could be less expensive to maintain over time, heat, cool, whatnot as well. Is that kind of
Yeah,
the correct way?
nicely summarized. Very good.
Okay. All right.
Councilmember Schaefer?
Yeah, so along the lines of what Corey was talking about, it's important for us to realize that these are either or choices. That's not at all what we're looking at up here, because the existing buildings will take maintenance costs. They will need specific renovations, especially in the safety area, and we are going to incur those no matter what. Assuming say a 5-year, assuming a new city halls or new facility and a 5-year, plan to get there, we still have to invest in existing facilities. So along those lines, one of the things I'd like to see in your charts, on a per facility basis, I'm looking at City Hall right now, you have a quality assessment index, 0 through 5, with 5 being the highest priority, meaning it's a safety issue, we need to take care of it right away. It would be useful, and I realize it's, this is something you just haven't done yet, but it would be useful to see a cost breakdown. What would happen if we addressed all priority 5 items in that facility, what would happen if we addressed all priority 4 items in that facility, et cetera? That would give us an idea, assuming I'm just throwing this out, but assuming you had to do priority 5, 4, and 3 within the next 5 years, that would give us an idea of how much that's gonna cost.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion, right? Yeah, we could do that further. That again, I think is what we're getting to as we fine tune these numbers. That will help the working Excel document as well. And that's what you should see with something like that. Yeah.
On that note, I think it might be hard, certainly easy to do mathematically, but it's gonna be like, ooh, are we not gonna do that 3? Well, we do that 5, literally right now. So I mean, just know that it'll be spitting out a number.
It's still subjective, right?
Right.
It's still subjective,
It's still
sure, you can't get around that.
Yeah.
But
But it gives you a ballpark, so.
yeah. And then I was gonna say, just maybe to take a little bit of work off the table in the sense like shorter term 0 to 5 versus, 10 years. I would say, and Dan, you could agree, disagree, or inform, but like, I would think appreciation, depreciation versus general market conditions, if they're shorter term, they might balance out. I mean, yes, there'll be certain costs that you might gain in just in market conditions, aside from a big drop. But I don't know, short term, I would split that too hard, but a great example is in other assets like trucks. We have a program replacement next year for public works, and I need over $5,000 for the work right now. So do we do that, or do we go get a truck, right? So it's always something, no matter what asset you have, but yeah, it's something that we're gonna get.
Yeah.
Larissa loves numbers. She's listening, she's not.
Other hands up, are there other hands up in the session? Tom, did you have anything to add to that, or you keep going? Can we keep going?
No, you can keep going. I think the only thing under police is that you could sell the modular structure. You can't
Yeah.
sell the land, but you could sell the modular structure.
Yeah, and I dancing around that, I think we changed it, Steve, I don't know if you saw, but I put a note, sale unlikely, at least the land is sale unlikely because we're on a farm, right? I did, again, just thinking off the top of my head, I've added, again, we've never talked to Parks and Rec, could the building become Parks and Rec? Something like that. It is a modular structure, and as much as it's useful, I am trying to push you guys to, not make it a modular structure anymore.
We have a couple questions, Councilman Lovett.
Yes,
Just, this is actually a question for you. Is there a possibility to actually build permanent structure down there because it is a park? Can we build on that? Yeah.
We can.
I think expanding the footprint might be difficult.
Yeah,
Yes.
but what's there is there.
Yeah,
You can
but you
also.
certainly, whether the current foundation could support any vertical change, but I think the footprint itself would be fixed in.
So it's not modular was not a worker. It was just what we're doing at the time.
Oh, good question. No, I think modular was the cost of opportunity that we had to this at the time, and that was it.
Got it. Cool, thank you.
Did you have another question?
Well, I'm gonna just reiterate what Corey said again. One of the possibilities we don't want to overlook is using that existing land to build a new police department.
Yeah.
The location is not bad. It's quite good for a number of reasons. There's land to the south of there. I know there's some wetlands concern, but there is city land to the south of the existing police department that we could potentially expand on. There's also a parking lot on the south side that we can expand out to, and it could be a 2-story structure
I was gonna
instead of a
say.
single-story
Yeah.
structure.
And we can go up, we can go up.
I don't think we can mitigate or pay our way out of that. There's a wetland as well as some tributary coming right down through there, that's map.
Yeah,
So vertical, I think, staying the footprint going.
yeah,
But I don't-
the footprint is a challenge.
We go directly into the shoreline jurisdiction once we step outside that boundary.
Yeah,
Mhm.
And
Retaining
the
wall
floodplain.
on the back side, it's pretty much to. I think the 100-year floodplain is just east of the trail, but we're in that 500 on the back.
Only because we're on the topic, maybe this is too fantastical, but like, can you go down a little bit? Like, could you, or is that not a possibility? Yeah.
Like, is there room for additional parking?
When you're so close to wetland, so.
Oh,
anyways,
like,
that-
Concerns, you don't want to drain a wetland, you don't want to set your foundations at a point where it now has drainage, accepting wetland drainage, kind of stuff. So we'll look at, but yeah, the footprint I think is intact and there's no debate about call it 3,700 square feet, the footprint should be intact.
Thank you, Councilman Schaefer. That, again, that's a good, that's what we wanted to hear again, also was the potential. Because that's what we want to get to eventually. Councilman John?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, sorry.
So we've been several presentations on this over the last couple of years, and this number for the city hall, one, the $9 million one.
Yeah.
Which, did this one include some of the other buildings that have renovations tagged in, or is that not rolling?
No, that is just the city hall. So
it's
I
not
think
like including the police department with it?
No, that's a whole separate exercise.
Okay.
It's the options, the larger options, the planning options. These are just trying to stay singularly to each of the building assets. It's not the combination of.
So it's just building city hall.
Just city hall, yeah.
Okay, anybody else got another question?
Go ahead.
So, when you explain, it may just be my Louisiana brain, when you say total investment continuously in all of these is a con, equal loss.
Yeah.
Are you saying that other than the modular building, when you invest in a building, bring up the code and everything? And when I build my house or I renovate my house, I choose to pick things that would increase the value of my home if I'm
Yeah.
gonna sell it.
Yeah,
Not everything that I do in renovation is a loss.
yeah. Tom,
So this is
yeah.
total investment loss. I
Yeah.
can't believe that 100%.
yeah, Tom, can you explain that terminology a little better?
No.
Total
I think you did
investment.
fine, Dan.
Well, I mean, if we invest.
Total investment is pretty much what it's going to take to make that a 75-year structure and finish and operation utilities within it. I think
Yeah.
that's the best you can do to get down to the point you're starting to specify the project.
So, I'm sorry, I'm gonna verify. So the police department's right bad example, but if we look at the current city hall, because it's not a portable room.
Go back to this, go back. a
And we invest.
Yeah.
$2.6 million. Right now, you say it's worth 400,000.
Yeah,
There's no way we can put $2.6 million in something and still say it's only gonna be worth 400,000. That's how I interpret that statement.
I see.
I mean, there's gotta be a value in that investment,
Yeah, I was,
a return on that investment that to me, and I don't mean this wrongly, what I feel like I'm being told here is the only way to go is build a brand new building.
yeah,
It's like, let's look at all the cons and don't renovate, go build you, feel like the presentation is telling. And a statement like that is why I want you to dissect it and tell me that that's not a true statement. We'll put $2.6 million into the existing building. It's gonna be worth over 400,000.
yeah.
It has to be, if not, I don't understand the numbers at all.
Yeah, again, it's a way we're explaining it again. That's what I was trying to ask Tom too,
Yeah.
because when we say investment, we have a connotation of investment versus worth and value, right? So
Right.
it's a difference. But, Tom, again, can you talk about that a little bit more at all, or am I not explaining it very correctly here?
Well, you can call it total investment or total cost. But when you're looking at the total existing building, sure, you're going to renovate a lot of the interiors, the mechanical system, electrical, everything else. But when you're all said and done, it's still an older style wood constructed structure. The same is true on the police. You can renovate or replace all the operating systems, all the insulation and everything else. But when you're done with it, it's still a modular building with a limited life and a somewhat limited value compared to, say, a brand new sustainable building that's built with a different kind of structure and different kinds of materials. So you can call it investment or cost. It's pretty much the same. What we're saying on build new, that's the total cost. If you want to say that's what's invested to get that new building, that's true. If you're looking at the total existing building, you could say that's how much money you put into it. It may not be worth that 2.6 million when you're done because it's still an older structure. But it would certainly be worth maybe more than 400,000 because you've done some significant renovations to it. Does that help?
So I was thinking maybe what's missing still is new value, right? Once the renovations are done.
Yeah, added value.
Yeah, I'm not trying to ask you to do that, it's that statement makes it seem like we're just throwing money away for $2.6 million into it, and that's just not true.
I think it's, Tom, I think he's right with just the wordsmithing of way we're calling things. If we focus better on cost and expenditure, again, versus investment, right? That's where it starts to get confusing.
Sure.
Yeah.
You got to realize that the building value is based on assessor's data. Assessor's data looks at the age of the building and its square footage. The market would look at what kind of condition the building is in, what its use potentials are, whether it can be expanded or whether it can be adapted. So the market value would be different than the 400,000, but the market value is not going to be 2.6 because the market is going to discount the fact that it's an older structure, wood structure that has a limited life, no matter what you put into it to try to make it last longer. And whether or not it's competitive in the marketplace, say, compared to a different kind of structure and a different kind of lasting life to it.
Yeah, go ahead, Councilmember Levitt.
Yeah, I think there's just a confusion, because I agree with Councilmember Isaacson. I think the confusion a little bit is just in the value. I mean, they went in there and they just like decided exactly what they thought the building components were worth. And then you look at build new, it even says it, less sale of existing city halls, or at 856, you're already over double, you know, what we would get if we turned around and sold it back into our pockets. But then the question becomes, and I think it's the total value of the question, if we're only getting 856, like selling it tomorrow, basically guessing, we're still out. Well, I mean, we're still way down if we're gonna put $2,646,000 into it. So that, I mean, that's a really, yeah, that makes me, that's a tough thing to understand. But again, we don't have to do all those changes, and we don't have to do all those changes all at once, and we don't have to, and that's where Councilmember Schaefer had said something that really, I think would be really of value, is seeing that 5, that 4, that 3, what's critical, what that does to the building, and then measuring that against, say, the 856, because that 400 is subjective, basically, we're looking at market value, right? And seeing where that shakes out, you know what I mean? I think that's more helpful in terms of me wrapping my head around it, at least.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just looking to it, the comparison, I totally agree, because we build new, there will be maintenance items throughout the 20-year period that we're comparing if we kept our building, right? And so, some of those things that we would have to do to City Hall are maintenance items that would end up being needed to be done anyway, even if we move to a new building. Do you know what I mean? And so, I agree with Councilmember Isaacson, is we don't really, like, trying to compare those two numbers isn't telling the whole story, maybe. But I don't know a better way. So I'm not trying to criticize, I'm just trying to like think through it in my head about how to interpret the numbers. Because if we invested $2 million in City Hall, let's say, I would guess it would last more than 20 years if we did that much upgrade. So I don't think you could take the $2 million, divide it by 20 years and say, oh, it's gonna take this much money just to get it to make it to 20 years. Do you know what I mean? Like, so I'm just having a hard time wrapping my head around how to analyze these numbers.
I think I just wanted to chime in. I think what maybe you guys were trying to get at was the market dictates what something's worth. So if you're prepping your house for the market and, okay, we're gonna replace all the carpets, you know, like you put money in, but you're not necessarily gonna get it back out exactly. That's maybe a poor example, but I think on the simplest term that is happening a little bit here. But I do think the things you guys have talked about would help break it down a little bit more, like the priorities of what you'd have to do. I also think of it in terms of we're paying for time, you know, so what's your cost per unit of time essentially? And I agree that we'd be having to do those updates also. regardless. So what is the absolute need to get done? If there's no way to add additional space, and also, if you're, renovating City Hall, well, where do those employees go? That costs more money of like renting space or buying, which we don't have a lot around here close by. So, Councilmember Mercer?
Yeah, sort of, more just two comments. I think what you just said, Amy is relevant. I think the other part of, just to take that a little further, is whether you build new or you use existing, you're gonna have maintenance costs in both. So in some cases, over the long term, it's a wash. The other is I just wanted to confirm that the sale of the existing City Hall is based, I'm assuming, on today's conditions. If you were to take 10 years to build the new City Hall, the expectation is it's going to appreciate beyond the 856, but again, these are just swag numbers for the comparison. But I did want to highlight, the maintenance costs that carries on a new versus an old. I do think it's a fair point that there'll be maintenance while you're waiting to build, but you would have that maintenance regardless of what you do. So.
Yeah.
Yeah, Dan, I would only add a couple of comments. The renovation is not maintenance. That's not operation cost. That's just to repair and replace what you have to repair and replace. And so maintenance is not included in either one of those numbers.
Right.
Second is there's a limit to just how much value you can add to an existing structure depending on what it is. So if you had a manufactured house and you went in and replaced and redid the bathroom and the kitchen, you're not going to get back 100% of that because it's still a manufactured house with a limited lifespan. And that's true, at least in City Hall, because it's an older wood frame structure. The last point is the 2.6 million only gets you a third of the space that you need. You still have 2/3 of more space that the 2.6 million doesn't solve. So somewhere you have to finance or find where you're going to put that space and what that space is going to cost.
Okay, should we move on?
Yes.
Okay.
And I just want to let everyone know DFA is meeting downstairs at the same time, so the noise you're hearing, there's a group that will be downstairs.
Make them notified that we are up here.
Okay.
So skip, we did police, I think, any more comments on police? We talk about next slide.
I guess I did have a comment.
Oh, yeah.
Sorry.
Sorry.
So I know you're aware that we're doing major renovations right now in the police department.
Yeah.
And again, just kind of for our information, I don't believe those renovations are figured into your estimates, right? So
Right.
some of the work that you suggested is already being done today.
Yeah, and actually, I would say, well, you can say more, I was gonna say finishing materials are probably the biggest, right? But it was minor relative to HVAC and things like that. There wasn't a lot there that we did, with this renovation.
Yeah, it's restructuring walls, repurposing, and then flooring and paint. I mean,
Yeah,
I don't think by Tom's definition, you would classify paint as ongoing maintenance. That's more of a long-term capital replacement on how you guys built your estimates, right? Maintenance is patching holes in wall and touch-up, not
Right.
repainting the entire interior or exterior, right?
yeah,
Flooring wears and is the capital asset replacement, not fixing and patching and whatnot. So it's a good example. It's a 20-year structure that's getting $158,000 worth of just surface replacement at this time. Obviously, there's some upgrades in kitchen cabinetry and extra things, but for the most part, it's very simply changing walls and covering surfaces.
yeah.
Okay.
Councilmember Isaac.
Sorry.
One more thing, just
Yeah.
for everyone who looks right, what Tom said, when we look at these numbers, we see they're saying renovate the value of the building and the land, you add those together and get the less of sale. Right, that's an assessment value again.
Mhm.
You mentioned market value.
Yeah,
It could go up or down, depending on what it is, but
yeah,
it's probably gonna go up
yeah,
on this side, which is a conservative number for all of us to look at. The reality is, hopefully, you can sell the land, that building, after we put some renovations that we have to, you would say, that number might go up.
yeah,
And so the bottom total investment could go down.
Yeah.
In a weird way.
And this building and the historic properties, again, this, we reference mostly the appraised.
Assessed.
Yeah,
Tax assessor.
well, no, actually,
Which is
no, we went
true.
back to
Right.
the original appraiser's evaluation, right?
Yeah, so most times when you look at public facilities and structures, the assessed value of that by the county drops off.
Yeah.
So there's nothing there. So I think what Dan was trying to say is we have had fairly recent
Yeah,
actual appraisals that we marked up
It's
from
still
our conditions, right? 'Cause I think we had 2014 kind of numbers from actual appraisals. Because there's a zero in the column on the website from the county of assessed value, we made some assumptions there.
Yeah.
So it's not, yes, kind of difficult. You can go read everybody's next door neighbor, like, you know, on Main Street too, it's like your house, but you kind of are guessing.
and I think probably again, I did want to call attention to it, but again, there was no thinking of the visitor center, the community center. There's no programmed expansion. We didn't, again, there is no talk about that for these. The things that, again, Councilman Isaac was asking about earlier. We like to think we're including this building in the potential new development, should it go forward with the new city hall lease. And in that option, we include this building as a component of that. And then again, that's a whole separate exercise that we'll show you. Okay, this building, again, maybe, again, just discussion. It's successful as a historical society still, right? It's successful as a use of public use, like right now, this type of thing. There would, of course, need to be some upgrades relative to accessibility. We don't have a two-story connection, right? But in the big picture, again, as an accessory to a larger development, we could use the building. It wouldn't be a full use, but we could use it as an accessory structure. So I just wanted to get that out there, to have that showing in your minds relative to this.
I have a question and then, oh,
Just a statement on the usability. So the structure itself, right, is what it is. It's a occupancy B, and I know that's more details than people want, but
Yeah.
you would probably do an A,
Yeah.
which means it's got a couple major deficiencies,
Yeah,
but it is what it is for today, 49 people in the room, so.
yeah, I was just curious about the, you know, the like useful life. This one had one of the lowest
yeah,
for investment to retain, but then it would only be 5 years, but for its use.
yeah.
I was just curious, is that just bringing certain things up to code or,
Yeah.
but then why is such a low number for?
Yeah, again, that's a math equation thing, when you
Okay.
start to look at the matrix, and it's like, just the way we approached each singular one. That's what shows up based on the value, and it's like, that could be off again relative to that
And
number.
I think to that, remembering some of those tables, Larissa might chime in, but I think most of that is the configuration and constructed timelines of some of this
Yeah.
physical structure, because
There
there's
is
3
different-
different eras.
There was different eras.
Different styles of foundations, some basically very little. I think the front wing has very little foundation work.
Yeah.
You know, there's other things, I saw Larissa nodding her head, but yeah, it's,
And there's
you
that,
don't hold the building up, right? That's their table, but that's kind of the number it spits off, because I believe that one may have been a level 5 for foundation, and the table, that kind of stuff.
So we'll go Councilmember Supple, Lovett, and then Natalie.
Yeah, that total investment to retain the useful life of 5 years, was that before any renovation takes place, or is that 5 years following the renovation?
that's before, yeah.
If no renovation is done, then the useful life is estimated at 5 years.
Yeah, it's us looking at the components of the building and the age of the building and applying what it is for the existence of it without renovating it. It's just essentially taking the age. We went back to the earliest age of the building and applied, again, those components the useful life of those components to the building, that got us the age.
Love it.
Yeah, this is more of a comment than a question, but I do think it's worth just keeping in mind as we're thinking about all these things and we're thinking about the city. This idea of moving everything off Main Street to like some new big building somewhere. I do think there's value in that, like, there's a piece of like the city in the city, like, to me, Main Street is an important, like, historic place, and I always thought, prior to being on council, personally, walking by City Hall and seeing the billboards with the things posted out front, like, that's part of what gives the character of Duvall, you know, like this small town feel that I think, you know, that I love. And there is something I just think that kind of makes me feel a little weird about some big giant brick and concrete metal roof structure off the side of down here to turn around. That, you know, it's just, I don't know. So I mean, it's totally just a comment, but I just want to say it out loud because it is something that I'm thinking as we're going through this.
Yeah, that's a good, appreciate your comment, yeah, for sure.
Well, and those are some of the philosophies we need to hear to wrap into some sort of, you know,
Yeah.
conclusion.
Yeah.
Councilmember Napa?
Yeah, so the 5-year kind of puzzled me too, so I went and looked at how the numbers could have spit out 5 years. And what's interesting is the foundation is a quality 3, and it's only $34,000 to improve it or whatever, and it's still, even with that, has a 66-year remaining life. So it's interesting that that isn't what's causing it. What's causing it is negative useful remaining life. So when you average in negatives, it really skews the number. Like landscaping is rated -14. So you start averaging in negative numbers, and the floor finishes are rated -19. The wall finishes -24. Yeah, there's just a lot of negative.
Yeah.
And so I don't know mathematically if a negative number in that way, it just.
Yeah. Well,
It
that's
skews the number when really there isn't life left potentially, but negative life, I'm not really sure.
well,
I
again,
think that makes that number
that's,
spit out 5 years.
yeah, and it's a simple math again, where it goes back to the original date of the building, that's all.
Yeah,
And that's why there's negative,
Yeah.
because we're beyond the useful life, even though, again, it's not taking into renovations, current renovations, it's just looking at that, it's simply.
so anyway, I think that's why it spit out 5 years, not that the building's gonna fall down in 5 years, but like
Yeah,
the flooring, one of them was the casework, which actually I would never want to replace the casework, because it's kind of, a lot of it's kind of historic, but you know what I mean? Like, so it's hard to know if all of these would really need to be done, the cost.
Yeah.
Because part of the charm is the quirkiness and some of the older features, so I don't know, just to throw that out there.
yeah, no, that's,
Since I don't see any other hands, I had a quick follow-up question, because I think I read through this too quickly and then looking back. So that's remaining useful life. So if we were to put that investment to retain into that building, what's the clock get set to there? Because I see the projected useful life for building new. I'm following it down the column, right? So if you put that investment to retain, do you have those numbers of what that would buy you?
we don't
Okay,
right now, but again, we can get that, right?
I
It would be
see.
going back again and looking at, once we did those renovations,
got it. Okay.
reevaluating it.
And I-
We don't-
Good to see her.
Yeah,
And I see Larissa has her hand up.
Good evening, Larissa Grandel, Public Works. I just wanted to make a comment about the Excel that kind of spit out some of those negative numbers. So those numbers are just the age of the building minus the typical useful life of the item in the line item that it is in the maintenance or replacement for description. So that's why there's some negatives, and that's why there's some that are really big and really small.
Thank you. Councilmember Schaefer?
Yeah, along those lines, yeah, I think, so the negative numbers are a little misleading, because looking at the HVAC, I see -9, yeah. The quality assessment index is 1, which means it's in pretty darn good shape. So I think the useful life overall is, like I say, a little misleading.
so we will also then I would give you an additional one, I think that would help, right, after renovations are done. and to give you useful life.
Yeah.
That definitely is bullet point. Okay,
Councilmember Lovett?
Sorry, one more thing. I think two numbers are helpful. I just want to jump up this point, because it's a really good point that was zeroed in on here. There's the use after we do everything, how much time we have left. And then there's maybe a reallocation of like, risk assessment across like carpet and HVAC versus foundation and, you know, windows or something that are, you know, there are things that are relatively catastrophic and there are things that are like more, you know, less of a thing. It's like that can be done easily, and that'll give us a more realistic number to be like, actually, you got 27 years before things start going sideways on, which is probably what we really are looking at. And that's probably why it's a little scary when we shoot
I
5
think,
years.
yeah, I think that's back to the priority matrix.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So. Okay. Next slide. I'm gonna try. What are we doing about that? We got- Do we have? Oh, we have an hour.
Pretty much, yeah. I mean,
Okay.
we just have one other agenda item, but it's pretty small. Yeah, it's easy to move if we need to take the whole time. This is the priority tonight,
Okay,
so
good.
yeah.
Similarly, with, and can we get this cleared up? Are we rec or community center? Do we,
Sure.
what do we want to call it? Or
Yes.
Is that okay just the way it is, just the way we're saying it, or?
It's called both. I think people recognize it by both. Yeah, so how you have it written is perfect to me.
And what was rec? What was rec standing for? Does anyone remember, or?
It's not gonna.
It's a term that used here. I've heard it everywhere I've been to a rec center, like a recreation. I think it's
Okay.
REC,
Yeah, yeah.
not WREC.
Well, I love with the plan, working.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to find it everywhere, but I just couldn't find anything. So.
Not gonna, I can't remember.
Perfect.
I think, this one I wanted to point out that in the previous assessment for the, appraisal before, there was a very clear comment too, that should, you want to do anything with that property, you'd have to, again, look at code, because we've got residential right next door there. And Steve, I don't know if you remember any of that, but, there was a clear call out that, again, we didn't get into, but, that, I'm just highlighting that, so that's all. Any specific questions here? Again, I think where we have struggled would be to just define what that asset is right now and what it wants to be. We've had various uses in that building. I just, again, want you to keep that in your mind and head. We have experience with creating, again, a community resource center. I don't know if we could go that far, but we're working on a community resource center in Auburn right now that, again, addresses addiction counseling. It's a place for job fairs. It's a place where third-party representatives come in again and meet with the community or members of the community as outreach. It actually has a day court in it. I'm not sure, again, do you folks have day court at all? Yeah. And it's a community, so it could be a community rental space. If we can resolve what we think we found in the assessments, which was the bug problem. Does everybody know about that at all?
It's way too much.
Way too much, yeah. We think we found why, we haven't, again, Steve, I don't know if we fixed it yet, but.
There's it's certainly better. We're still working on other treatments to continue, but
There's open air vents essentially on the overhangs. They're just screens, and they're large screens that essentially flies can get into and get behind the insulation. That's our theory as to how everything's getting in there, the flies are getting in there. If we could do bug screens, change that out. Again, we're hoping there's a simple fix there.
yeah, there's a few friends in there now, but it's hard to tell if they're remnants that were still in there before
Previously,
the
yeah.
degradation.
Yeah,
But I don't know that they're traveling in, because we did address those screens under some really interesting soffits between the flat top roof over the old garage and then where the peak roof comes off the old steeple. So,
yeah. Okay, next slide. Similar, any questions here? Just like same comments about numbers, things like that. We get that. Public Works, yard and shops. This one I think we touched on, again, just in general. This is the shelter out back that we feel is probably in the worst case scenario right now, seismically. It also has an occupied space in it that is underneath the shelter, which isn't legal in essence. So again, we're pushing this one, shouldn't use the word pushing, we're just putting that out there as maybe the most prominent for, again, some real thinking on. The yard, of course, you all know, is not efficient. You can't get everything back here. It needs the most attention. That said, again, potential talk for a new location, sites out of town that might serve the community a little better. I think we've been talking also about Big Rock, Steve. I don't know if that's been brought up, but the potential there is that we can see a facility that could still fit within a residential neighborhood. There are many examples of that. Again, should you hire the right architect, they can make it work. But
So when I heard you say Big Rock, if we're talking about potentially within the Toll Brothers development, that I would not be in favor. That land is worth a lot of money commercially and for other reasons.
Yeah.
And to put a public works yard to shield it in such a way would be a much more expensive endeavor to build a building that didn't look like that.
Yeah.
That wouldn't make any sense. And for me personally, to use such a valuable piece of property, right in the heart of
new
$1
development.
million
Yeah.
to $2 million, that would be a stretch for me to think of putting it somewhere like that. I do think somewhere on Big Rock would be, I mean, I just look up by the ballpark even, you know, the land is, you know, obviously less valuable, adjacency to a park that requires maintenance. I don't know, just a thought, I'm just throwing it out there. I mean, I personally would not want to put a public works yard on land that has commercial value. We have very little commercial space. And I hate to see us put tractors and trucks and yards and because it would devalue the area around it as
Yeah.
well. I mean, there's synergy that gets created in a commercial area to use up that much. That'd be for me,
If it
a
ever,
no-go.
yeah, we appreciate that for sure. We'll note that down. There are, again, if we ever get that far, we can show some examples of how to handle it in that situation.
Right. I mean, if you had no other location
Yeah,
and you had to accommodate, I could see being interested in that, but we have lots of other areas around that
That's right.
perhaps wouldn't require such extraordinary measures to
Yeah.
shield it.
why go that route?
Exactly.
Councilmember Schaefer?
Let's see, so I see your note that we can't expand the existing,
Yeah.
building on the current property. And I assume the existing building doesn't have sufficient space for, growth.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So one of the things that we should consider is, you know, potentially a major renovation of the existing facility. And, you know, and along with that, there is land directly to the south of there that's privately owned. Just right across the street.
Where are you talking about? I'm so sorry. What are you talking about?
Right here.
Oh, there.
Giuliani piece.
Oh, okay, sorry, I was super curious what you were talking about. So, right? Very,
Where we're like, where else public works is?
public works is right there.
Yes, okay. There's
Right there, okay.
land directly to the south of that, that's privately owned, some big parcels.
Got it.
There, and there's nothing on it. It's vacant land. So I think that's a possibility we should look at keeping the existing land. I'm not saying necessarily the existing facility, but the existing land. And if need be, expand to the south of there, where those, where that vacant land is.
Councilmember Levitt?
Tangential question, kind of regarding the same space. Hypothetically, if we were to move it, and again, I think it's a good idea to find it somewhere off and away. But does that then become available down there? Just like, is that ours? So like essentially you could have a new slot, like right off Main Street for something.
Yeah, I think, one of the, like a year ago, maybe one presentation. Built City Hall, got the City Hall front right here, kind of. And so they moved that facility somewhere. I don't know, because the same, it's not real well. Further, was trying to keep, what actually you brought up, Jared, it's keeping it on Main Street. Yeah, and that small town deal, it was one of the things that was good just for that.
Yeah, I don't feel like there's, it's tough, you know, for the yard, where would you, it feels like we would need to buy new land for it, because it just doesn't feel like we have a good piece of property that would be just right for it, for some of the reasons that were brought up. And I was kind of curious, I mean, I'm guessing there's nothing against us purchasing land outside of city limits if it was close by, you know? But there's constraints because then you're, you know, building something under King County, right? So it's probably not preferable, but I was curious because, you know, where the city limits are, there might be something kind of perfect and affordable that's not really usable for anything else. So I was just curious if we would eventually get to that point of looking slightly outside city limits, or if that was not preferable for some reason.
I can talk to the operations group. Certainly, the further you go, the more you travel.
Right.
If I could stick a little Apple tag on the guys and see where their map is, right? You know, it'd be interesting to know where it is, because I'm sure it's fairly on the periphery down here in McCormick, obviously in Big Rock, and then the other parts, and then you're just kind of hitting the arterial stuff. I mean, I don't think it's too far gone to move anywhere. I don't think anybody's gonna complain based on what they have, and yeah, we can only really house about 8 workers in there. And that's more than we have down there now, because we have opportunity to kind of split apart. And, you know, seasonally, we invest in a couple, 3 to 5 summer helpers. We gotta put somewhere, so yeah, no, I don't think that's a bad idea, and I think that's more about policy, like, hey, you know, does something need to be represented downtown? Sure, maybe, so you know, whatever, to make a choice. Does operations need to come on downtown? Oh, no. Is the Giuliani piece a nice piece? It's about an acre total down there. It's probably gonna be prime one day for some kind of multi-story, everybody sees it in their own way, you know. Living that's on top, rental bikes or something down below kind of thing, parking in the city thing, maybe a PPP, I don't know, I'll talk about that later, but. Maybe that's more of a opportunity for a city hall and a massive public-private partnership, right? So, no, I don't think that's a bad way to go. I mean, all signs are pointing to kind of fleet in, you know, electrifying fleet, so we could probably reduce some of the dollars per mile travel for fuel and stuff like that,
But I do think distance is a really important factor for, especially if we're looking outside of city limits, but what Councilmember Naplan brought up about land value, that's important too, like what's the use there? I mean, we don't wanna be using a prime piece of property for a yard, and then you wanna consider the surroundings. You know, if you have to put a huge investment in all kinds of screening to make it look nice, so we wanna be good neighbors too, so yeah, those are a lot of really good factors to consider. Councilmember Mercer?
Well, I was just gonna say, I mean, I know we're discussing Big Rock. I mean, I think on the other side too, particularly if it's for more for the yard in terms of like, you know, something off of 275th there, or because there's some areas that I know that's obviously was looked at for development. Again, outside of the city, but there's some that's not necessarily as suited, which would still be centrally located. So I was just sort of a +1 for, there are probably a number of opportunities you could look at, particularly for equipment storage, beyond, particularly if it, freeing up this land would create some additional flexibility and or a potential location for a city, other things that we would potentially offer more value on off of the main downtown corridor.
And I think the question, I don't know if Laura can answer better, your question, I don't think there's anything that says we can't have a piece of land outside of city limits. It'd be great to be contiguous,
Yeah.
something like that, UGA, UJR would be
Yeah.
probably wise, just for, but I don't think there's anything
You
that's,
can do, yeah, you can do municipal annexations outside even your UGA. A lot of cities do it for water tanks, like if you go up in some city. But there's a lot that's within our UGA as well, and close to the park. So I think there's definitely things to explore and look at. I think not having it there is probably ideal in the long term. Yeah.
John?
Go ahead.
Is it too much to ask for any future comparison? We're trying to get numbers once we invest in it, we're useful like this. Is it too much to ask for a square footage increase in something like we're saying that we're gonna go from one small building to a larger building?
We have that.
Yeah, and because this is kind of apple to apple comparison, the way to just add that to this too, like, okay, we're gonna go from a building that's too small, we're gonna build we're gonna spend $3.2 million, but this one's gonna be 5,000 square foot, this one's 2,000.
Yeah.
To me,
We have
that's
that.
$1 per square foot is a big deal, and I'm having to look at this for, I
Yeah.
have to go back and dig in some else and back and forth.
Yeah,
I don't know, that's too much to ask.
no, we have all that, so that's an easy thing. I was gonna, again, if it's worth jot down, Steve, or plot 132-606-9210 in the King County records. We looked at a plat. Was it for sale? It's 2.4 acres. I honestly don't know where it is. It's in Duvall, somewhere in Duvall, but again, it was.
I bet it is the parcel that is adjacent to Toll Brothers that's been for sale for a couple of years.
Is that
Not
anything? It's,
that, the one you gave is Kennedy and Main,
um,
northeast side of Kennedy. Where the one guy over here.
and that one is in pre-application for a tourist institution, isn't it?
I don't know, this is Kennedy and Main, so I don't.
Yeah, I
haven't
think
looked at
that's.
yeah, I think Coganton.
Adjacent to Coke Lemon,
Yeah,
it's a couple acres. But I think you said the yard should be about 2 and change. or something
yeah,
like
right around 2,
Park City.
yeah.
A lot of grading.
And that's, believe it or not, about an acre. Yeah, 1 acre.
Behind this here.
Yeah, maybe.
I went beyond what I was supposed to be doing and was messing around a little, that's why.
Oh, no, it's only like, it's not even half acre, but that's 1 acre.
That one parcel by itself, how big is the yard?
18,000, so it's under a half.
Combined to be an acre and a half, what you're saying,
Not
not even, okay.
But
The land to this, again, directly to the south is actually a bigger parcel.
it's about a
Than what we're currently on. So we don't want to, discount that either.
Yeah. Okay. Moving on. I think, next one. Yeah, so this is good. I don't think, again, Steve, you correct me, but this discussion again, this is a decision tree. I think I tried to simplify this before. Once we know more, this is too hard to do. Again, with just what we're talking about, without more information, without the numbers that you guys are requesting tonight. What I wanted to show this is, again, when we get to this point, this is a simple matrix to say, keep or build a separate building, that thing, if they're combined together. Where are the sites, which is what this discussion started about tonight. And when we want to do this, we all talked about 2, 6, 12 years, that type of thing. This will be very helpful as a tracking tool. And then, of course, number 5, this is relative to what Tom is gonna talk about just a little bit more with investments, is if you sell the property, if you dispose of the property, and or put it for another public use. Lease, private sell, put it out for an RFP, that type of thing. I think, again, this is a bit premature tonight. Tom, you have any comments on that?
No, I think that's fine for now.
So we'll go back, we'll, again, get more detailed numbers based on tonight's discussion. And then the next iteration will be helpful to do this type of exercise, I think. But again, I don't think we're ready for that here tonight. That said, sorry.
I was just gonna say, when we do eventually get to this though, I'm assuming you wouldn't, I mean, is your intention to go in order of like 1, 2?
No.
Because like for me, I would have to start on the other side.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
No, yeah, no,
Okay.
it's just it's a matrix again.
Okay,
We
got
don't have to, yeah, we don't have to go in that type of order, so. Next slide. So Tom, again, was going to talk to us tonight about financing options that I believe some of you know a little bit about, but I wanted him to walk us through the potential of what we could achieve in doing some large project
Councilmember Schaefer,
construction.
do you have a question or?
Yeah, and Tom, if it's okay, before you start, I just wanted to, I guess, make a request here, because I think it's a little bit separate as far as the financing aspect of it. But I would like to see a couple of options that we currently don't have. One of the options you do have, City Hall on the Visitor Center, expanded out back. What you actually have though is expanded clear out back to include the land where the current public works yard is. I'd like to see a subset of that. So again, City Hall located here in the current Visitor Center, but there's a significant chunk of land directly west of here, the parking.
Yeah.
So without any modifications to the public works yard, what would be the cost of expanding the visitor center, creating a new city hall building in that additional space right behind us? Because if you look at Google Maps, which I did earlier today, that's a lot of space and would be a 2-story space. Furthermore, that would give us. Oh, and the third thing is that parking lot out there is largely dysfunctional because you can only get 1 row of cars out there. So yeah, there's parking out there, but there's not that many spaces out there. So yeah, we'd be eliminating some parking. I know parking's a problem, but thinking a little bit, outside the box, there's a street back here. Right now it's 2 ways. We could make that street a 1-way street, put diagonal parking in that street to create additional parking. If we so choose. So that would more than make up for the few parking spots that we lose behind here right now. But I feel there's that the visitor center sits on a big enough chunk of land. It's all city owned. Even with, potentially major renovations to the existing facility and obviously building an expansion. I want to see what that would cost us. I think it's worth us considering.
Okay.
Cynthia, is it okay if I make that?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, good.
Honestly, this is your process, so.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Let's see, again, and I want to see, this, maybe you've already captured this, because potentially the police department might be, since it's modular, might not be preserved, but I am very interested in keeping the police department at its current location and making it, 2 stories or, extending to the south, I guess maybe that's not possible, but it's been, yeah, we can extend to the west maybe a little bit. You know, there are some places that we could get a bigger, bigger building at them. And I think that's worth us considering. And the final one is what we talked about, the public works yard at its current location, but with an expanded size, possibly with the land directly to the, some of the land directly to the south, which is all owned by the same individual. And creating a much bigger facility, with the combination of existing land and some new land right next door to it. One of the things that's attractive to me about this is what Corey brought up. It keeps City Hall on Main Street. I really think it's important for the character of Duvall to have City Hall right in Old Town, Duvall. I like that idea a lot. And I understand we're very constrained with what we can do here, but I think there's ways to do that. And especially with, with the land we do have here. And we do those things and we still have our, what's the current City Hall, and we have options to make it a visitor center or whatever, then too, so. Anyway, that's what I would like to see at our next discussion.
I think there might be appetite for it if you're fine with taking like 5-10 minutes to see if other council members want to just give some general thoughts and ideas. Is that fine? Or did you? Yeah, okay.
A quick policy note on that though, like, I think it's important to talk about the relationship between a commingled city hall and a police. That means stuff to people who work in. I don't know, again, it's the city's, vision to choose, but there are different things when you create shared spaces as opposed to completely separate spaces that you don't have to consider, right?
Yeah.
Security is obviously one major thing, and not just security of the structure and what happens outside or when it's in it, but how we walk around in a building that has maybe not good things in it, right? That's a police station sometimes. Granted, it's Duvall, we don't have that, but other places, they make a conscious choice to either A, include the police station in a city hall, or B, do not include the police station in city hall. So I think that's a fair topic that might push some of those decisions into a way that like, we don't even have to talk about it that way, because you're gonna keep it there, or you're gonna integrate it, so you have, you kind of set some bookends. Just a thought on some of those policies.
Or maybe you reach out with even to a city like Slim, who just built a city hall in the last 5 years that did commingle their police department with their city hall and find out what the pros and cons of it are. And I know that others have a municipal campus where it's not necessarily attached, but it's on the same campus. And there's a couple of cities like that.
Councilmember Napa?
Yeah, you just got my brain thinking about, what a fun exercise, instead of like you were saying, like, how would we go through this by order? Kind of talking about each building by itself, everything is so interrelated. What would be kind of a fun exercise is if we each had somewhat a map of the city and we could brainstorm some configurations, because, I don't know, I think it would, a visual like that of kind of brainstorming, in that way, I think would be, because I have some ideas, like I think for me, having the yard right here, I mean, that's really valuable land as well. It's right in this business area. You could create, like you were saying, a bike shop down there, down by the park. And I've seen Woodinville, City of Woodinville, I think has a partnership where they have leased space to provide income that also supports. It's kind of an interesting thing. I haven't looked at it in great detail. But I do think that land down there could be useful. So I would be hesitant for me, even though I think it's an interesting idea, definitely still trying to get a yard where we're storing vehicles out of the core commercial areas. The quaintness of this town, I think that could be a really neat area, either if we put a city hall or add some more commercial to expand. But anyway, I don't want to get too far into it, but I think it would be kind of a cool exercise if we could look at the city, and even if you have little pieces that you could move around, like what if we put police and main city hall together? Where would Public Works be? Because I've looked at other cities, Snoqualmie, city of Snoqualmie and city of North Bend, and even their Public Works is in a different location. In one, it's on a campus area, so it's in the building next door. And there's pros and cons. I mean, there's some continuity of operations. When one building goes down, you've got another building. You know, put everything, all your eggs in one basket. Like, how would a COVID gone if we were all in one building? That would have been a lot more difficult. So I think there's pros and cons, and having that conversation of discussing pros and cons. Like, I like the idea of where the location of the police department is, you know, do you have to combine it with the city hall? If it's close in proximity, maybe you get some of the security aspect without potentially some of the negatives of all being in the same building. I don't know, just some thoughts. So I don't know how we brainstorm that. But I think it would be very difficult for me to just go building by building and have that conversation, because they all work together and almost kind of have to, you know, move them around.
That's what I was thinking.
Like a building blocks.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking, because it's like, each person would be different, you know, if this, okay, well, then we're going with that. I think for me, you know, those are really interesting ideas. I guess I'm of two minds. One is I like the police station in that area. It's just, so it's been that way and it's so nice and quaint. But from a tactical perspective, I think about, there's only one way in and out. There really, I mean, I guess you could cut across, I don't know. So it's a little more accessible. Also, there is that security, which goes both ways, you know. It's nice to have your police in City Hall. You know, they're right there if something's going on. Especially if your emergency center's in there as well, like there's no travel, you know, they're there already. And usually with bookings and stuff, there's a separate entrance for that. It's not like they're bringing people through the lobby, anything like that, but there's a whole process for that. I really loved one of your original ideas, which was keeping this as like the face, but I wasn't sure. I don't think I remember it ever being discussed that this would become like offices, like this would stay like a community space, but there could be like some kind of sky bridge or connection or something going to that more, you know, new building. Back there. So I think, I still feel like Public Works yard would be great to find a piece of land close by that works, that we don't have to do too much to besides build the structure. But you know, I'm pretty flexible in the rest of the stuff. I just like keeping that historic connection, and I think this building is really important. I have a soft spot for the rec center, and I love the city hall. But you know, I think inevitably we're gonna have to figure out what stays, what goes. But if we do keep it all, like, well, how do you fund that? How do you take care of it? That's a lot of maintenance cost, and get really real about what are we using them for? You know, I think there was a lot of potential uses that got pulled back because we were talking so heavily about selling them. So let's not have a bunch of stuff going on there. So I want to rethink about what could you do there? Is that the building you would pick if you could start over, right? Like, we want to get some youth programming. Is the rec center, or if we vacate City Hall, like, is that going to be an ideal location for something like that to occur? And if not, then really get serious about letting it go, so it can hopefully be preserved and used for retail and create more commercial space and help economic development. So this is a lot, and so I hope we can have a nice exercise like that, you know, in the future soon, and just really, there's so many options. I'm not sure I'm dead set against any of them. I think it'll be really interesting to work through it, but I've heard a lot of really great ideas tonight so far. Did other councilman, Director Lanchesky, and then Councilmember Isaacson.
I think to think long-term, right? I think the yard is kind of an easy one, in my opinion, to get out of here. Can you imagine if the curb gutter sidewalk built out on these streets and they're parking, like, how the guy is gonna get a truck and trailer and a backhoe out of there and get deliveries of 50 yards of sand and gravel and everything, like, even though we make it work, and it is, again, maybe not operationally fine in all aspects of building and occupancy construction, but like, it works, but I can't imagine any tighter constraints on access occurring, making it more high function. Like, the access is gonna diminish as every year goes on, and something else builds up around it. And I think when you think even if we are spread apart, there are ways to connect it, right? I mean, we have parts, we're not all ecstatic within Toll Brothers, but there's a connected element. You can connect these elements as you spread yourself out. It's just more infrastructure to invest in. But again, the community gets used to too, right? Sidewalks, pathways, whatever it takes to get you from A to B. So there's ways to tie this thing together. Yeah, that's all.
Councilmember Isaacson.
Yeah, again, back to that one of those presentations that I like the best, is keeping this to the front of, City Hall and the visitor center. And I like the idea that we were talking about, getting rid of that yard, moving, I think, what the vision was, and we can combine the majority of our government space needs in this entire L, especially probably in that piece, going have to do everything. You're talking about, you have a big L piece of government facilities, they could probably bring in everything that we needed, except for the yard. And maybe a rec center, you know, and then, oh, by the way, where that connects, if you do it right, partner with businesses, it's also right across the street, essentially from the police department, you keep the police department there. So you've kind of taken a city that developed around not a civil engineering approach to developing its land and just piece of piece, and we can kind of pull that into the civil engineering aspect of pulling our entire city in kind of L shape and retain valuable storefront up here. If you move the City Hall from there, the commercial park, but you keep what we're all wanting, and it's not, I don't look at it individually, this is what I hear from the citizen in this town. We wanted to keep that small, cozy town, and that's one aspect of it. It's very important. That's my sense. Back to the yard thing, like I drive up and down Main Street here, and I hate driving down Main Street and looking at industrial facilities on our main street. It just wasn't developed around that, and so doing that again, knowing that we all drive up and down the bike, I think would be a horrible thing to do. To drop a yard, not that it's not important, but to drop a yard into a very prime piece of real estate, residential, commercial property, everyone would probably like, what do they think, just like everyone says about that storage facility, right? They did a great job where it looks, but anybody that comes to visit me from out of town, I'm like, what in the world are y'all thinking? Especially when I go to city council, and I wasn't there whenever they did that.
I didn't say that.
Councilmember Levitt?
I love that idea, and those are great questions. I love the L idea, and one thing that accomplishes that I'd just like to sort of add on is it encourages maybe a flow of traffic and broader thinking about the overall footprint of downtown, because right now it's just kind of the fronts on one side and the fronts on the other side, with the exception of a couple Family Drive, couple things that kind of hit up on the back or on the further backside Ace, you know, but having that turn down there will just create more of like just a little bit more of a path, and might actually make like the second layer, so to speak, of Main Street, where I can imagine, you know, if that's done nicely and you're having events down in Depot Park, or you're having events here and there, there's a whole new walking structure there that actually becomes like, I think it sounds like Bend, or you know, I don't know if you guys have been there, where there's like layers of and some are just walking streets, you know, not necessarily, you know, not necessarily roads, but just walking paths where storefronts can actually, like, there's options for new storefronts, new buildings. So it's a really cool idea, and it maybe it spreads the aesthetically nice facade a layer beyond, because right now it's kind of like, once you go behind any one of these buildings, all bets are off. So, I don't know that, you know, this is down in the future, but I do love that, because that encourages that, and bears with it a responsibility, you know, footprint problems. So I think that's really cool. And I agree, like, I think the first thing, low-hanging fruit, is definitely moving the yard. I mean, it just makes sense. I think about that fire station, the practice fire station area up there, near that turnaround where they have that big piece of land, they do all the drills. Something like that for that team, not there, but something like that proximity to town seems to make a lot of sense. I don't know if that's too far out. But
Councilmember Supple or Mercer, did you want to chime in with general ideas? No pressure, but just any thoughts you had?
Yeah, I mean, I you know, been content to listen to other people talk, because there's a lot of moving pieces here that really sounds like we need some additional information to move forward. I mean, I have some, you know, you look at satellite images of the area, and you know, there's a fairly, to me, an obvious potential, not just the L, but if you look at, you know, that triangle from where the existing yard is all the way to the police station, there's obviously that set of parcels, but you could develop a very nice campus that accomplished all these. It's really just a matter, comes down to willingness of you know, landholders willing to sell and cost. So I think there's a number of opportunities. I think there's still a lot of unknowns, and I think that's what we're trying to work within, you know, not knowing the land that's available, not knowing the structure, having various options around configuration, you know, landing some of the key concepts, like, is there an overwhelming desire amongst staff and the council to have a single building? or a single campus? Is there a desire to have a split? We're basically throwing out a lot of options without having that framework in space in terms of our principles. We all agree we want, a consolidated facility. I think that would simplify a lot of these decisions. Right now, we're still discussing, do we have one or do we have two? Do we have, a more expensive or less expensive option? And I think any of those could be true, but I think that's for me, the next piece I'm looking for, some internal discussion around conceptual where we want to move forward. And I think that's the schedule that we've discussed in the last two meetings, and we haven't started to sort of put into a programmatic format. And then that will drive some of the additional decisions. So, that's just a couple comments. It's not necessarily at this point that I'm leaning one way or the other way. I think, though, before we start comparing apples to oranges, we kind of have to know, or apples to apples even, we need to know as a council what our preferred options are. And then my desire would be to move forward from there.
Thank you. Councilmember Supple, did you have any thoughts?
Well, it just seems like we're kind of all over the map right now, which makes sense because, we're looking at renovating versus, renovating versus new builds, and then trying to determine the locations. And it just seems like there's a lot more thought needs to go into it before we can really get down to the details. That's all I have.
Thanks for letting us have that moment. I felt it building, and I'm like, no, I need to let a little ideas out, and then hopefully we
Good
can
call.
focus more. Oh, Cynthia, go ahead.
So I wasn't here at the beginning of the project or the project design, and I know that there was some staff feedback on the staffing element and space needs relative to staffing. Has there been any part of this project yet that talked to staff about their preferences in terms of space? I'm thinking, and not that this is the most compelling, but I'm just wondering what kind of staff input has been received to date about, for instance, staying in City Hall. I would imagine if you asked the question, you would get some pretty detailed feedback. That question.
Yeah, I mean, you're right on with that. I mean, but we didn't get into detail, like where would you want to be? That type of discussion. We talked about programming space, right? Like, again, we moved the stickies, if you remember the sticky exercise, and we're moving stickies around to show this department is by this department. And then the proximity of that, but it wasn't literally, where would you like to be located? Never like that, within the city, within the building, that type.
Right, so for instance, the difference, and I'll just speak for myself. If you were to ask me the question, the difference between being on Main Street and being in some remote location, like off of Big Rock or something, I would have a very specific opinion about that.
For sure.
And I imagine the community and council and the mayor will all have different opinions about that. And I think at some point we should probably build in some kind of feedback on kind of the philosophical preferences. Not that those are the most compelling, obviously, cost, availability of land, all those kinds of things, operational needs are probably a little more compelling than how you feel about it, but I think it's worth asking.
All good, all good discussion. Thank you for initiating it, because I wanted to hear what you all been saying. This is what design is about. I mean, again, we haven't really got to that until now. And you get excited about that. And so we'll brainstorm, Steve, with about the next steps with that and with this group, because I think it'd be very productive. Again, with this group, move into that next piece. That said, Tom, not that you're gonna talk about the boring stuff, but it's maybe not as exciting as what we could do in the next get together, but you'd like to, again, talk about financing strategy in a little more detail, but not as detailed as your slide. Is that fair?
Okay, I'm going to just give you a very brief overview of some of the different delivery methods and financing methods, and which ones of these would apply to which solutions. I borrowed this from Skagit County. I know you're Duvall. But the first one at the very top is conventional process. It's called design, bid, build. And that's where you hire an architect, and the architect designs the building that you want to have developed, and then you put that out for bids. And that's for the lowest bid wins in this kind of process. This is the standard process for anything where you're going to renovate the building or you're add to an existing building, as well as new, but it's pretty much the process you would probably follow for all the things that don't build a new facility. This is not necessarily the cheapest approach. One reason why it's not always the cheapest approach is because you're depending on the lowest bid. There's a tendency to over specify what the solutions would be, over define them, so that if it's the lowest bidder, they're not going to go awry on what you're trying to achieve for your project. It also is the longest process of what I'm going to show you. And sometimes the process can actually take much longer than normal when there's a lot of discussion of what the design is going to be, or if you haven't worked out what the performance characteristics of the building and its relationships are. The one on the chart on the bottom is design build approach. And in this process, you hire a team, architect and contractor, and they work together under a design build developer to actually design and build a building at the same time. Now, it's not that you don't provide them some idea of what you want to achieve, but it's called performance specifications. So you're giving that team some idea about what the size of the building should be, what the maximum cost would be, how the interior spaces should be arranged, what the performance characteristics are for your mechanical systems, your electrical systems, and everything else. So you're not turning the keys over to them, but you are giving them the latitude to design it at the same time and pick equipment and materials that will fit your specifications. In the conventional process, you decide that for the contractor. In the design build approach, it's done by that team according to your specifications. The average savings is between 10 and 15%. We did 2 projects on the Capitol campus for the state, and we actually got 20% savings. And the savings are because it's faster, and therefore you're not financing the construction and the loan programs, and also because the equipment is selected that meets specs rather than the other way around. Next slide, please. Well, by the way, before we leave the design build approach, is if you're going to use it, the state has to certify your project, particularly on a smaller project. Typically, the minimum construction cost for this kind of project for the state to consider is 10 million. And not all projects that go down to the state automatically get approved by the state to use this approach by local governments. Next slide, please. These 2 slides indicate using the team to actually finance the development and finance the acquisition of the project. It's called lease to own, or the top one where it's done privately, you see a lot is build to suit. And in this case, you're using the design build process, but the contractor developer is providing the money to develop it. And then they lease it back to you, and basically you're buying it back from them afterwards. And you can buy it on a long term, the same terms as you'd have on a bond, or even longer, or it can be on a very short schedule, depending on what your financial capabilities are and what your preferences are. You get the savings and development costs because you're using design build, but you're going to be paying more for developer profit and financing. So it's kind of a break even once you're done. It would be very similar to what you're calling the conventional process. The advantage here is you can use a design build without going through the state to have you approved to do that, because in this case, the developer is doing it for you. The bottom chart is lease to own with what's called the 6320, a nonprofit developer. And in this case, a special entity is created for this particular project to qualify for the 6320 provisions. A nonprofit entity can do this, but they have to set up a specific organization just for this project that's independent in which to do that. The advantage is they can issue bonds at the same rate that you can do bonds on your own. And 6320 allows nonprofits to own and rent the property. So you're getting the savings advantages of 10 to 15%, but you're also doing it with, in essence, public money costs. A number of city halls and office buildings have been developed by cities in the county using this approach. It's become very popular in the last maybe 10 to 12 years. The one issue on using this approach is that the cost of setting up the 6320 usually means that the minimum development cost for the project has to be about $20 million. So you'd be looking at combined facilities for you to be able to use this approach. Now, the other advantage, we'll get into it later, is it can be structured to match whatever your financial interests and capabilities are. It's not limited for 20 years. It's not limited for a fixed amount. It can be longer. It can include balloon payments and so on. And the other advantage is just this flat out flexibility. Next, please. Now, these are some examples, and I haven't updated them for a while. It just shows you the different approaches, where their monies came from, where their general funds. Increasingly, they're coming from levy lid lifts rather than geo bonds. And on the right-hand side are just some examples. As I said, this is a little bit of an out-of-date list because it's being used much more prevalently than this indicates. Next slide, please. Now, one thing to qualify on the lease to own, the legislature does not consider it debt. It means that when you put your financial statements together and you list your debt, lease to own is not considered debt on that statement. But the market considers it debt because obviously it's an obligation. So the market is going to evaluate your creditworthiness, presuming that this is debt. Now, specifically, as you see down at the bottom, the reason you would go to 6320 or even to private developers to shift the construction and other risks to a private development team and to have more flexibility than what would be available under the public bidding requirements to select a team well positioned to assume these risks. So what you're really doing in addition is transferring risks. Next slide, please. The other issue is whether you go to bonds or you go to levy lid limits or levy lid lifts. The issue with bonds is that it can only be used for construction. It cannot be used for operation. It cannot be used for furnishings, for other limitations. And usually bonds issued in the marketplace are 20 years. And bonds require a 60% approval of a 40% turnout of the last major election. Now, you know that the levy lid is 1%. Revenue cannot be generated more than it was the year before, excluding new construction. But the levy lid limit, as it is, apply only to current assessed evaluation, do not affect property tax levies from new construction. So when you add those in, depending on how much growth and development is occurring within the city, you're actually slightly above 1%. But for all practical purposes, let's assume the 1% is what your revenue would be each year. Now the levy lid, that's the levy limit. Let's scroll down and I'll show you some examples on lifting it. You can increase your statutory levy rate with a simple majority of voters. The one advantage of the levy lid lift is that it only takes 50 plus 1% to approve. There's no minimum turnout. Now, the only issue with raising your levy rate is it cannot exceed the maximum statutory rate that you're allowed. But if you looked at what you're probably charging now, you're considerably below what that maximum rate would be. So you do have capacity. The question that would not only be what can you change the rate to be, but what is your combined debt? And what does the combined debt do to potentially limit those rate increases? Now, there are a number of different ways of doing it. First one is a single year levy lid lifts. It allows you to increase the maximum levy by more than 1% for 1 year only. Then that amount is then used as a base to calculate all subsequent 1% limitations after that. They can be temporary or permanent. Scroll on down, please. Temporary single lid lifts can be used for any purpose. They can not only include construction, but they can also include operations and maintenance and furnishings and any other thing that you want to identify that you need to complete your project, unlike bonds, which is construction only. They can last for any number of years, but if they're dedicated to pay debt, they may not exceed 9 years. When the lid lift expires, then the lid reverts back to what it was before. So what some cities have done is to promote a particular development project. They'll say, we want to raise the lid. We want to raise it by this amount. And when we get the amount that we need to finance whatever we're going to do, it'll revert back to what it was before. So in essence, you're doing the same thing as a bond, but a little bit more flexibility, and you're somewhat selling it the same way. We need this money to complete this project, and when it's done, we'll be back to what the rate was before. Now, you can also do a permanent single year lid lift. This measure doesn't expire and the levy lid never reverts. However, future annual increases can't go above the 1%. So when you bump that up, then you're back to the 1%. Some cities have used this saying, and the justification to the voters is, we need to raise and reset the levy lid, and the extra money we're going to generate is going to be dedicated to a certain purpose. That may be development of public facilities, it might be parks, it might be streets, it might be whatever it is. And it's easier to swallow that if you can say this dedicated for a particular purpose. If you like the purpose, then go with the lid lift, than just saying we need to raise the lid just to finance more government or to continue to finance government. Please scroll down. Now you can also do multi-year levy lid lifts, and the multi-year levy lid allows you to bump up or exceed the 1% limitation each year for up to 6 consecutive years. And they can be used for any purposes, but the ballot must state what purpose you're going to use it for. Unlike a single year, which doesn't require any purpose per se, even though politically you're probably going to state it in your referendum ballot. The lid must state the total tax rate for the first year only. It cannot state what that rate will be in future years. For all subsequent years, the measure must identify a maximum limit factor for which the total levy amount may not exceed, so that the voters aren't looking at a blank check. But you don't have to state what those terms would be for all your future years, depending on what you're going to try to do with it. Scroll down, please. Multi-year lid lifts may be temporary or permanent. If they're temporary, they're 6 years. Scroll down, please. And the temporary, as I said, is up to 6 years for whatever purpose. But a permanent multi-year lid lifts does not revert, and the maximum levy is then used as a base to calculate all future 1% levy limitations. So when you put a multi-year lift on, the first issue to decide is what you ask for in that first year, because that becomes the basis for what you're creating your financing cash flow for. Now, if a multi-year lid lift is used to pay debt service, then it can't be used for more than 9 years total. And a lot depends how it's defined, not only in your ballot measure, but how you intend to use it. So if you say we want this debt service just for City Hall, then you're looking at a 9-year total. But if you say we need debt service to finance public facilities, and in those public facilities may be a number of things, then you may not be limited to that 9 years because it's not project specific. Scroll down, please. Now, the ballot measure requirements are pretty straightforward. I think you saw that. You only need 50+1 for passage. They don't require any minimum voter turnout requirements. And that fact, plus the flexibility of it, has made it a much more useful tool than bonds. Scroll down, please. This is pretty much, we've covered this. It's just kind of qualifying it more. The only thing I would point you to is the MRSC has maintained a lot of history on levy lid lifts, and about 75% of all levy lid lifts have passed that have been put up in recent years. And I think that total is even higher based on the most recent elections. Scroll down, please. Now, before we leave, I want to cover real quickly what's called public-private partnerships. Basically, they're a financing mechanism. They're not a source of funding. And you're typically doing the public procurement, public financing, but you're doing it with a partnership. Now, public ownerships or private operations or public financing works best when public financing and public ownership need to maintain, but the program and maintenance of the development is complicated and requires expertise. And that might be new facilities. Scroll down, please. The approach sets up a not-for-profit owner or issue. And basically what you're looking at here is using the 6320 to do it. And the rent in this case that the nonprofit is going to do is dictated by the lease, but it also includes operating costs. So when you use the lease to own and you use a nonprofit or even a private developer to do it, your lease is not just to pay or purchase the building, you're actually having them operate it, because keep in mind, they own the development until you complete your purchase. And what we found that most of the developers, whether they're nonprofit or private, build sustainable, long-lasting structures in case they end up holding them for a long period of time and have to basically eat the operating costs. Again, they're taking on the operating risk, not you. And the development team earns a development fee commensurate with their development risk they take on and no more. They don't have a minimum profit or a maximum profit issue. The benefits is the nonprofit board includes you. You're part of that board that manages the facility, even though you don't own it until you've completely purchased it. Now, the process is pretty simple. You select a not-for-profit developer. If you're using the nonprofit approach, you can also use the market rate developer. You select the team. You include the RP does not do the design. You give them performance requirements. You establish a guaranteed maximum price. That's one of the big advantages of this approach. Scroll on down, please. And again, keep in mind, they own it until you've completed final purchase. Now, I'm going to give you an example of just one nonprofit developer and what they've developed. This is a National Development Council. They're actually based here in Seattle. And here's just some of the, just scroll through some of the quick projects they've done. Redmond City Hall was their first. The Washington State Data Center is on this. Scroll on down, please. They've also done housing for colleges, King Street Center. They've also done utilities, Lake Tapps Parkway, for example. They've also done residential and scroll down to the last page, parking garages. The only issue is if you use this approach, the 6320 nonprofit, you would be doing a building or a campus. We can have multiple buildings, but you can't do one building here and somewhere else in town do another building. That would probably run, we'd have to really check whether that can be pulled off as to whether you could call that, quote, one consolidated project. Scroll on down, please. This just illustrates, this is for Bellingham, and it shows that once you've settled on how you're going to do each facility, then we run it out for 20 years or whatever, it indicates how each project comes online and what their cash flow requirements are as they come online. And we use this then to manage which method we're going to use for which development, for what our cash flow requirements are and what our debt capacity is. And this will probably be the final step once you've made your other decisions. Scroll on down, please. And Dan, unless there are questions, it's up to you.
Any questions? We got some hands here, Tom.
Councilmember Schaefer and then Isaacson.
More of a comment, I guess, than a question for me, but right now with our, with the situation, the property tax increases that you've seen in King County, it would be a hard sell to increase property taxes even more with an increase of levies. I think that would not get, if we did it today, I think it would not get anywhere close to 50% of approval rate. Now that may change in the future, but like I say, right now, I think that approach is going to be a very hard sell for us. There was a significant shock by lots of property owners here because of the tax increases.
You would know that better than me. I think the only thing to keep in mind is if you went out and tried to do a bond, the levy lid lift is going to be easier, cheaper, and more flexible. As a comparison, if you don't have to do a bond or you don't have to generate that kind of financing to carry some of these projects, then that's wonderful.
Councilmember Isaacson and then Nevlin.
In the lease to own scenarios, do they typically have any penalties for paying off early?
No, no, there typically no penalties for paying early. If during the time that you're carrying whatever agreement you had with a private or a nonprofit about your lease purchase, and you renegotiate the terms, whether you're extending or doing balloon payments or so on, then that's still a private negotiation between you and them. But paying early is not a penalty.
So in theory, like you get started with a lease to own private developer, pay them what we need to each year, and then if we do a levy lift in 5 years from now, and there's an appetite for it, we could take the appropriate, whether because it's not a debt in this case, right? It's a lease. You said it's not debt. So then we could take that levy lift and pay early.
And let's take Seattle, for example. The first time that it was used was in Seattle for a park measure. And they sold it on the idea that we want to lift the lid until we generate a certain amount of money. And when we get to that money, it'll revert back. And the rate would revert back, and we'll use that money to do what we propose to do. So you could have a lease purchase agreement where the levy lid lift is aimed at generating the amount of money to pay it off.
Right.
You can without having a commitment to an extended period of time.
Councilmember Nevlin.
Yeah, I am just kind of, I mean, all these ideas are interesting possibilities for how to finance. But I think the question we need to ask ourselves, and Councilmember Schaefer, you brought it up, is based on our tax base, what would be a reasonable amount that we could afford to pay? And you think of the different inputs. REIT is already, our future REIT is already committed somewhat to a few other projects that will roll off eventually. The lease to own situation is kind of interesting, especially when you look at, water, sewer, storm. We have great money coming in that's dependable to potentially pay a portion of the lease, a portion of the city hall that serves those utilities. I do think it'd be very difficult to go and ask the taxpayer, because I think, let's say it was a $20 million amount that we needed to come up with, and that's conservative. I think at this point, looking at some of the ideas we've had, especially if that includes, moving the public works yard, plus building it again. I mean, it's a lot. That's like almost, probably at least $6,000 per home of an ask. And if you did that over the maximum 9 years for a lid lift, you're not gonna go out there and say, hey, I need $800 a year for the next 9 years for a city hall. I just can't comprehend. I mean, I think you'd be hard to get $150 a year. City halls aren't popular for, I think the things that are popular are parks. Sometimes police financing, things like that. I'm not saying city hall is important, I'm just talking reality of what people are interested in paying extra for. So I'm trying to bring this down to the reality of real numbers. Let's say a hypothetical $20 million project. Where would the money come from? How much do we need a year? I think we need to start brainstorming how we can potentially finance it before we come up with a $50 million capital project. Optimal, wouldn't this be fabulous? You know what I mean? Like, at some point, I think I used this analogy before, like if I thought of all the things my family would need to be comfortable in a home, we wouldn't be living in the house we live in now. We'd be living somewhere much more expensive, but the reality is I don't put together the perfect home because I know I can't afford it. It's reality. So I'm just trying to understand if we break down the numbers of if, however we arrange it, how much of that city hall cost of the building could we attribute to sewer, water, storm, or utilities? I mean, that, we have a pretty steady income stream from that. How does REIT look in the future? How much is already committed? I've also said this in the past, I consider construction sales tax as sort of an impact fee on new development. Right now, we're spending our construction sales tax on temporary employees. I mean, I've always thought of that money, we should really be investing that in impacts of development, because that's what that money is. And so potentially setting some of that money aside to pay in to a new city hall. I don't know, I'm just brainstorming out loud. But I think we need to start thinking of real numbers, because all these ideas sound great, but like, how exactly would those numbers work? Like, let's maybe make one of those spreadsheets with a hypothetical cost and a hypothetical sources of money. Cause I don't want to get too far down dreaming up something it's just really a waste of time.
Don't assume that these are exclusive of all your other tools. It's just another tool in your toolbox.
For sure,
If you're
yeah.
doing renovations or additions to existing buildings, then you're probably going to be looking at levy lid lifts if you're short on some of those other financing tools rather than a bond, because a bond won't be able to do that. So it's just another tool in your toolbox.
Yeah, so I guess maybe kind of brainstorming the different tools and what it would mean if we tried to do a levy lid lift for $20,000 over 9 years. What would that ask be? Is that even? What about 10 million? What would we be asking the taxpayers for? Because I don't think asking the taxpayers for $800 a year for a city hall would be anywhere near flying. And I know that was just one idea.
Yeah, and I think that, pivoting off that a bit, it's always hard. Do we talk more numbers first and then, talk about options? But I think there's a way to do it, probably a little bit of both at the same time. I think it's just being conscious of, are there different configurations? We're talking about consolidating departments together or changing up how we're configured now. What are the different price tags? I mean, one might be way more costly than the other. So even though that would be our first gut, like, oh, that would be nice to do, but it's really expensive. This also works. So it would just be good to have some awareness, which I'm sure you guys will have, of general costs,
Yeah.
numbers. If you do this, it's gonna have a much bigger price tag than this other option.
Yeah, the exercise of the work, the study of the programming needs to happen. Cost can be applied, and we can set up an example like that could be a useful tool just to, again, test the waters. It's not a public display of things, but it's again for you guys to see as an example. So,
Because if, let's say you threw in $20 million, like then every time you think of a project that's more, you'd be like, well, we'd have to scale that up. Or we'll do less, you have to scale that down, but at least you'd have some level of perspective of what it would take.
reality. Yeah.
Any other questions or thoughts? Okay, my last one would just be, those are the next steps. What kind of, I can't recall what the time frame here is, or what kind of time passing between these, like to get to the final deliverable, like what in your mind, what amount of time is gonna pass? Is that like, 3 months, or I don't know, I can't remember what the original time frame is.
I'd say starting with then a rebound meeting, right, coming back, sharing. This meeting next month is spring break, I don't know who's around, but those are kids in schools, I'm not, or not.
Yeah, we need it, maybe we'll talk about that next.
But yeah, trying to get stuff on the books to get a target, several weeks for sure, right, I mean.
Yeah.
Changing some tables, looking at some other numbers, but it sounds like it might be a little more free flowing of some thinking kind of meeting too, right? Everybody, I don't know if we wanna get real out there and boards, teams,
Yeah.
Apple mentioned, I mean, that's
we need to put some thought around that, but I think that's the next exercise for a good workshop. And that would be important to do, I believe, from what I'm hearing, that everyone rolling up their sleeves a little and, you know, sort of testing that, but that could happen at the next workshop. And again, we can talk offline and make that happen, but I'd like to see this wrapped up within the next couple of months.
Yeah, okay.
Just to get a big picture on it, because I know where we are and I know where you guys are, and that would be the goal. I didn't, the part that Stephen, you guys can help me, but the hearing input, that came from you. Hearing input will develop outcomes. Is that on the table still, or?
I don't know, it came from here, or
That was the original outline that I had said, so
I think, if I can recall, once we got to some kind of thing, I think we wanted to have some public input, right? I don't know how early on are we, I don't think we have honestly anything to ask people what their thoughts on.
yeah, I guess that's where I was
Right,
going.
I think it's, we don't know our thoughts, I don't know that we would want more thoughts, I think once you get into maybe. Whether it's final deliverable or some options, maybe here, public comment on that stage for sure. You can always undo what we have done if we hear something better, but.
Personal opinion would be at some point after our workshop, where we really get into it and move stuff around, then maybe, but I hate finding that just right moment, because I don't want to get too far gone before we can get public input too, but I realize there's nothing to really, what would you show right now? We'll go, John and then Jennifer really quick.
I think that's probably what I was gonna ask, in big projects, like where's the car, where's the car, where's the force, this is gonna be fun about taxpayers, no matter how we do it, right? And so we've done surveys, and we want to do a land for a park. We put a lot of effort into that, ask them what they want a park center to do, I don't know why we wouldn't put saying, I'm gonna put a survey, we don't have to wait for a voting. Put a survey out, say, hey, what's your appetite for, consolidating city hall and, for building you, because our staff says we need it. I mean, I don't think we're just going to this idea of city council, and their staff is telling us. Our city, elected, they're saying, we need to do something with our stuff, get the whole part. Is there a survey out there, what's the appetite, because then if we know there's a good appetite there, we're, I'm gonna put numbers in there, in the survey, 20 million, equates to this much in taxes, 50 million, and let the survey kind of tell us what our budget is based on people's money. And says, hey, I'm willing to give you 20 million on public everything else I'm already doing. And then we can put it in and say, hey, that's up for $20 million, that's our cap. And whether we do it with lease all or we do it with a live levy or whatever we get out there is, and so people, what's the best for them and vote. Figure it out.
Councilmember Naplan and then Director Thomas.
Yeah, I was so interested in what you were saying, I just completely lost my train of thought.
Exactly. Do you want Laura to go first or do you want
I think as part of doing a survey, you also have to tell your story. You can't necessarily tell a story in a survey. So a lot of cities and school districts and agencies will do an open house of their facilities so they can see, hey, these are the facilities we have, these are the results or the preliminary results of what we're looking at. And we're going to follow this up with a survey that then talks about, maybe some preliminary recommendations for an appetite of spending dollars. But I can tell you, I think we would fail if we just go out with the survey and there's no context.
Yeah, do it right.
Yeah, for sure.
Did you remember your thought? Okay.
I was just, I couldn't remember where the meeting was and this or that, and, today when I was on Facebook, I saw the city posted announcements of adopted grain and this and that, and I thought, too bad that we aren't telling people we're actually having a meeting tonight. And, even if they know, hey, we're not making a decision tonight, I feel like the community should know we're having this conversation. If they want to come and listen, we just say, hey, we're just really brainstorming super early. Don't make them freak out that we're building a study hall, we're meeting the planet. I mean, because we are really not sure what's the outcome of this, I think. And so the earlier the community knows we're having this conversation, the better. I wouldn't want to be blindsided I'd be annoyed. I'd be like, oh, you've been talking about this for a while. How come I didn't even know? So just even if we could announce the next time we have one of these workshops, make sure it's on Facebook maybe. Anyway,
Say, Dan, I hate to do this, but I'm really late for the next Zoom. If there aren't any more questions of me,
Yeah, no, we got to the end. Thanks, Tom.
Thank you.
all right,
Thanks,
thank you
Christine.
very much.
Anything for about, I mean, you've got what you need for now.
Yeah,
Okay,
no, this is
we
great.
appreciate your presentation and thanks for coming. Did you have one more?
Yeah, but this is more just like for council. I mean, we could bring this up at our next meeting, but it wouldn't be bad for me to have like a council meeting specifically allocated to just kind of discussing this even more broadly. This is one of those things where maybe this is, and I don't know how it fits into Robert rules and all that, but like it just merits like more discussion than like these bits and pieces. Cause like I'm interested like in a deeper analysis of what you're saying, or like a little further thought on what you're saying. I feel like I'm getting like, you know, I'm getting the icing, but not the cake necessarily in some of this, in some of these things. And so maybe it's a special, I don't know how that functions, but maybe if we could agree to like a special session just to kind of dive a little bit deeper into what we're thinking, because there's a lot to unpack. And that's just personally where I'm at with it.
Yeah, I think, this is such a big thing. I would anticipate we would have more standalone meetings because it's gonna take an hour or two to really get into it. So tonight was really great. And I know we put one extra little thing that wasn't super important to do tonight. So, this was good. Councilmember Mercer?
Yeah, I mean, this is more just a feedback on the format. I know this is the first sort of cow we've had out of sequence. My only challenge is from a time perspective after the full day, like the 2 hours plus is tough, particularly. So I don't know if we're going to sort of review that. Did the format work? Was it long enough, short enough? Because I think part of the impetus about starting early was to finish earlier. So just a little feedback, not negative on the discussion. This is a super important topic, but I want to make sure that we set some cadence or rigor around time so that we're also sort of respectful for other things, since this is sort of an addition to our regular, cadence, but more than happy to even slot in additional meetings. I just think they're easier sometimes after the end of the day on the odd week, that it's not another, a 3-hour meeting. So just general feedback, sort of a good of the order comment.
All right, I was just I think this particular item is a lot bigger to unpack as well, and is gonna take more meetings. Where like future cows of other items, like when we're supposed to be where I come with like one call, like say a food truck or whatever, like we're gonna be done in an hour. Like you can have 2 items. I think this one is just really unusual, and I think it's gonna take a bit to get through it.
I think this is a very special project too, that we want to take our time on a bit, but not too much time. We want to keep moving forward, but in a productive way. So thanks for that feedback though. All right. Okay, so we will, so the only thing left on our, thank you again for your presentation. We appreciate your time.
Yeah, a good discussion.
The only thing left on our agenda is discussion on committee assignments. And so we can do one of 2 things. One is we can just shelve it for next time. There's one, there's the one though. What's the acronym? Where'd my paper go?
It's K4C, and I sent you a nice little email.
I know, but I still have not found the meeting schedule, but it looks like they had one that was in Seattle.
And I was,
Okay.
so K4C is that organization or group that's run by King County that we joined last year. And we didn't have really staff dedicated to it or council. And finally, the group's like, hey, are you guys gonna have any sort of representation there? And so I talked with Cynthia and the mayor, I'm like, we need bodies there, we like joined the group, right? And so I went to my first meeting. I have to tell you, even for me, who is a planner, technically a vet, it was a lot of technical information. So it was like a little bit drinking from fire hose, but they make recommendations, like they vote on things. And so I feel that it's strongly that we need to have that council representative there, because a council member gets to vote as they're working through these things. And these things are really about climate action change initiatives, whether it's, energy code or climate resiliency or greenhouse gases. And so it was a lot. Like I said, going to my first meeting, I was like, I felt like I was at the Snoqualmie Watershed Forum for the first time knowing zero. and that it took time. And so I think that, you know, we should have that representative there.
So we do not know we know nothing, right? Like, what's the frequency of the meetings? Are they hybrid, virtual, in
It
person?
was hybrid because I did attend, that. I can email back
Okay,
and say, I don't even know if they're regular, really. I just got the.
they might be quarterly,
They might be quarterly, so I can check back, but if there's council members that are interested, it would be good to know, and then I'll get an email of the council member McHenry, and we can always bring it up at the next one. I just feel like if we're gonna be long, that we need to have people there.
Is there anyone, and it can be more than one person interested, we could develop maybe possibly, I don't know, do they do alternates, or is that up to us? Like, could we send whoever we want? I know it makes sense to have a regular
Definitely
person,
could
but
have an alternate, but your primary person is gonna be the one that gets to
Yeah.
go more regularly and vote.
Mhm.
But honestly, I'm always about having a second person in the room as well. I know Rick was second chair for a while on the watershed forum, and he still attended meetings, which I thought was really good because then it's an easier transition. One, if somebody can't go, or there's a change in council.
so is there anyone interested in that committee?
And we're gonna, doing, you want to have my name on that. That's just gonna be my second one. And I abstained from the vote for that. So if I understand what we're learning, and what all entails us, what it necessitates to do. I've thrown that idea, trying to force out of it as well. So. Because of over commitment and because I'm already not like to see anything here, that is possibly unfortunate to do.
Yeah, I mean, I have similar feelings about that group, and I mean, if I was assigned to it, I probably wouldn't want to vote on things unless I checked with everyone else in case my feelings don't match. So, I think that's a tricky one, and I think our community especially might have conflicting feelings about a lot of the votes. Not just council, but I think the people who vote for us and elected us. So I struggle with that, that entire thing. I almost wish we weren't on it. I think I voted no. So.
Anyone online, Ron or Mike, do you have any interest in it? No. So one thought I just had really quick was if potentially, I mean, if it was even just, if somebody could go and get the download and bring that back and talk to us more about what's going on at the meeting, I feel like we're missing out on what they're talking about, which could be either our Duvall person giving that input and pushing back a bit and changing a course, you know, like, I don't know, like, I haven't been to.
I'm with you. I wish I had the time, I'd love to.
Yeah.
That is a reason, because an example, I don't even know if I'm right, but I said my perception is, you know, when something like K4C, if it is the source of pushing things like this, to tell us that we need to change all of our building codes and move forward, everything has to be electric. You know, if we have the ability to evolve, definitely say we just agree with that as a, you know, from an environmental perspective, I think a lot of us agree with that, but part of our job is not to just look at the environment, but also look at how that would affect this community. And when you look at, so your first one is, when I don't have all the electricity, when all the storms come through and everything, I'm having to let people come stay in my house who I really don't want in my house. And, because I need to take the high road and take care of it. And then I take another level from elderly people who are not gonna have access to electricity or another form of energy. I just don't agree. It doesn't make sense. To me. You're putting harder than one basket to take care of your business. In future development, future homes, and you're saying, okay, but we haven't done anything in our infrastructure to say we are gonna provide our people support for electricity backup whenever a winter storm rolls through here, and now you're gonna have old people die in their homes. And then the city will be accountable for that. That's where I may be doing it, but I'm here with this thing.
I think it's fair enough. I mean, I think all the perspectives are really valuable. I mean, even though some abstained or voted no, like we all majority voted yes, so we joined it, and so now we just need somebody to go and listen, I don't know. There's nobody, I feel like my plate is really full with all the things I've signed up to do, so I am a pretty hard no.
Just add,
Yeah.
like, even if somebody's not prepared to be a voting, like to vote, but would sit in and listen, and then I can work with the council member and we can provide summaries back. And if, you know, and maybe it's something that we can then go back and vote, you know, yes or no on, or for now, we just
What is
sit
the
in.
commitment?
Yeah.
We need to find that out.
I would,
I couldn't find on the website, usually it's posted, and so I was looking before the meeting to try and find this, because I wanna know how many meetings a year it is, what time are they, will they continue to be hybrid or virtual, because like, for me, that makes a huge difference. It's gonna be in downtown Seattle. Yeah, I'm calling it, so, you know, that, no, it's just like a region, like, it's a group we signed up to be a part of, and so it's kind of like SVGA or any other group where you're coming together to kind of create these bulk narratives. It's like SCA, really, if you think about it, what they do. They are saying, you're more powerful than just Duvall saying, we really don't like this, or we want to do this. All these cities that have joined collectively one voice. Now, you won't always agree with the people within that group, you know, and I think that's an important push-pull. You don't necessarily want to vacuum. But the last thing I'll say too, because we do need to find this out, and I get that, and I'm sure we can find that out soon. You have a contact that you can
and
email.
what I'm gonna do is, if everybody's okay, I will just send an email out to council too with some of the information,
Yeah.
the links. And then I'll find out what the time is, and you can kind of go through, see what see what they're working on.
Because it's a newer group, it just formed,
Well, I
right?
don't know, it's been around since 2000.
Oh, they just did the extra push and
Yeah,
started
it's
marketing
like
it.
we
Okay,
just
Okay.
joined it.
that's
But,
funny,
like,
that's why I thought they were new.
telling me, like, some of the bigger cities have been in it for a while.
I think
mostly electeds that attend, or is it staff that attend?
It's both.
It is both.
Yeah.
so, like, each city gets one vote when it comes down to
Yeah.
it.
And I'm not that person.
So, and I think it would be important to get to the point where we know what's going on at each meeting, and that maybe at some point, is it something we want to stay in, or do we want to pull out? So that we know we just don't want to invest time in that, you know?
I'm always about like going to groups that you don't always see in the same vein, right? You do see eye to eye, because they do need it, right? We all need to hear kind of the counterbalance, right? And we are getting ready to go into building code and energy code and wildland urban interface, you know, codes. And some things we're not gonna have a choice on, some things we will. You know, I prefer the choice route, you know, versus the stick route, but, you know, the state, the building code, you know, can be more of a, and energy can be more of a stick approach. And I think that those 3 items are going to be tough for us to get through, and we're pulling them together now. We actually are going to what are called WABO meetings, which is building official meetings, going to training, trying to figure out what's going on. There's still some changes that are happening at the legislative level that, you know, and we're having to like say, okay, we're getting these prepared. We're already writing the building and energy code. The WUI is coming along because there's this nice big new DNR map that shows, you know, no offense to any of us, but shows Duvall blazing red, which means we're one of the higher risk cities, which means there will be building code changes based on that. And DNR's finalizing those maps, and that WUI, Wildland Urban Interface, was approved by the state in 2018. It doesn't become effective until the maps are done. So, yeah, so just, there's a lot, and that one's kind of not really associated necessarily with, you know, Q4C, but it is a little bit, because when I looked at their thing, it said, it did talk about wildfires. So I'm like, oh, are they also talking about these things? And like, I have just attended my first meeting, so I am probably not the best person to be talking about it. But I still think it's an important seed. If we're part of that organization, then.
Somebody should be
we should-
hearing what's going on.
Yeah.
Corey, did you have something?
2 questions, really. How long was that actual meeting here there? How long was the actual?
I want to say it was like 90 minutes. Yeah, I think it was from 3 to 4:30. I'll go back
The
and
meeting?
almost all of these type meetings are day.
Yeah.
So it sounds like you'll get back to us with some more specific information. hopefully somebody can find time to at least go, and I guess we'll have to figure something out if we can't, I don't know. Okay, so we'll follow up on that, and just really quick before we adjourn, because it's sometimes hard to chase down email. I think I got Ron's top 3 preferences for internal council committees like public safety and things like that. So just while I have actually everybody here, I thought I would put you on the spot and get your top 3. So a reminder of our change is that as of right now, until further notice, the individual committees are not meeting regularly. This is just, we need to figure out, so we're not figuring it out tonight, but if I could get a top 3 from everyone, then I can sit down and see where the overlaps are and what makes sense, make a suggestion, and then we can approve it. And it just means, like, if you're on the public safety committee and then the committee of the whole, the council, we decide we really want the public safety committee to get together and discuss this policy, we already know who that is and we don't have to figure that out, that we're already assigned. So I was just curious, Rick, do you have a top 3? So we've got finance and administration, public safety, land use, public works. And I think we want to go ahead and just know if we have people for economic development, because that may come into play with some of the things in the budget. So out of those,
Well, I did send you that.
did you?
Yeah, but,
do you remember?
yeah, no, I still remember what it was. So, public safety,
Got it.
land use, and public works. I don't feel strong about public works, so,
So your top, I'm guessing public safety 1, land use 2,
yeah, I think that's correct. Yeah.
and public works 3, but
Yeah,
potentially
well,
economic development 2.
Economic development would probably be a good one for me, but I probably want to replace that.
Right. And this doesn't commit you to, like, we can talk about, you may be like, I really only want to be assigned to 1, or, but again, these are not meeting unless we come up with work. So it's just so that at the ready, council could say, hey, we need this committee to do. And then, of course, if something comes up in the middle of the year and you're like, this isn't gonna work for me, that's okay, we'll figure it out. This is just trying to at least have a pool of people to email or organize. What about you?
Economic development, land use, well, we'll take, you know.
So there's finance administration, public safety, land use, public works, and economic development.
Or is it?
You said land use and economic development?
Yeah, that's probably it, it's like a.
What's your most tight, or are they about the same for you in terms of priority?
Privacy.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, Jennifer?
Probably finance, land use, I mean, I think public works is super interesting, I don't know. Probably my first 2 is stay on one by one. One thing, just, I see land use and economic development often together, so instead of creating another meeting we might have to go to, it might be easier just to combine them, I don't know,
That's what's written in code now, so we need to talk to Daniel and
Yeah.
say, do we need to change code to do some combination? So that would be a Daniel question that we need to find out.
Sending people over.
Yeah, I know, no, I know. Okay, so finance administration, land use are your highest priorities.
yeah.
Oh, and public works, I think.
Public work.
Okay,
But I mean, unless economic development, I don't know, it's,
I know.
I guess we have to figure it
This
out.
is not etched in stone, this is just trying to figure out, do we have a few names to throw on each committee so that at the drop of a hat, like, we don't have to do this every time we want to assign something. Did you have a top 3?
Yeah, probably finance, public safety, and then, it's a tie between the other ones, yeah. So,
You'd be fine on the other ones, but your top 2 are like finance administration and
yeah, like I've always told you guys, the way my schedule is, but
Yeah.
I always staffing, whatever that, wants just put me where you need a person,
Okay,
and I'll figure it out. But those are my,
those are your top 2, and then you'd be willing to serve on the other ones too, is what you're saying?
yeah,
Okay, let's see, Ron, I've got yours. You had said public safety, public works, land use, and you were willing to, and again, I'm not committing people to 3 committees. I'm gonna look at what everyone said and figure out where the holes are and fill people in. So that was what I had for you. Mike, did you have a top 3 that are your preference?
Well, you haven't mentioned the Human Services Grant Committee.
Yes, you are on that. You, me, and Ron had said we would step up to do that, but that's a temporary one. That's just a quick couple meetings, so don't worry.
That doesn't count?
I mean, well, what are your other top three? That one's an ad hoc committee, technically, it's not voted, so
Well,
kind of harsh, but that's okay.
all right, Public Works,
That's fine, you know.
Public Works, land use. Public safety.
Okay, perfect. I'll figure it out. I'll do some post-it notes and figure out what flows. Okay, so with that, thank you guys. I know it ran a little long. Oh, yeah,
This took up my two, and especially in you guys, like it did me last year, don't forget to turn in your finance declaration.
yeah,
Before the 15th of April.
The F1.
You gotta pay a fee and you cannot get out of it, I did it last year. So,
the F1 with the PBC, Public Disclosure Commission, they do.
Yes.
They're really, yeah.
and there's no like,
Yeah, I think you have till April 1st to update it.
Oh, okay, so we'll chat in a second about that. There were a few remnants, I think, from the council meeting on this agenda. So, yeah, I think we'll go to adjournments. So we'll turn at 7:32. So we can stop the recording. And then if you hang around for 1 second, just the one thing I wanted to follow up with, it's not business, but I just wanted to remind people. Yeah, so it's not business, but I just wanted a reminder that